As sun sets on summer and dusk brings fall, the days grow short and the nights grow long. As dawn brings winter, the skies become gray, and the wind grows cold. By the fireside is where the stories are told.
There was a time before the flood of memory, before the world had words for fire or stone, when a vanished people watched the stars with eyes not meant for men. They called no God by name and carved no prayers into their shrines, for their language was of breath and light and number. The stone tablets they left behind were never meant to be read, but felt. The cities lie buried beneath deserts and seas, their towers consumed by the hunger of time, and their faith erased by fear. But they left a warning, and that warning is written in the alignment of the stars. The legend comes from a broken set of copper discs discovered near the mouth of the Euphrates, wrapped in lead sheets, sealed with bitumen, and buried beneath a collapsed temple. Most who saw them went mad. The few who recorded what they saw never spoke again. The discs described a system of stellar categories, each star assigned not just a name, but a commandment, and each constellation a curse. It was said that 3 ancient figures governed these signs. Not gods, not demons, not primordial intelligence, but primordial intelligence, so old their breath preceded creation. The text called them by titles, not names. The first is he who walks in the skin of the lost, cloaked in the remnant identities of the dead. The second is the gasp between fates, a floating shadow of inevitability. The third is she who weeps behind the veil, a siren of emptiness who births famine with her gaze. Each appeared when certain numbers rose in the sky, a triangular sequence that pulsed through the heavens every 1,000 winters. When all 3 signs converge, a city would vanish, a king would bleed the moon, and a temple beneath the temple would open. In a university attic half buried under bureaucratic dust, a man named Corin obsessed over these symbols. He had no family, no friends, only scrolls and fragments of forgotten gods. One midnight, in a storm-lit library, he traced the sequence of numbers from the discs against recent satellite star charts. He found the pattern. It was not a myth. The celestial alignment was repeating. It would complete its cycle in 6 weeks. The flickers in the sky, subtle deviations in redshift, invisible to the naked eye, mirrored the description from the ancient tablets. There was a temple, everyone knew of it, dedicated to Enki, the god of waters and secrets. But according to these tablets, there was something beneath it. A vault sealed not by stone, but by number, and guarded not by warriors, but by resonance. The mathematics of its opening were not geometry, but a kind of tonal calculus. Gorn began having dreams, a rose bleeding thorns, a spiral staircase made of bone, voices whispering prime numbers backwards in an ancient tongue. He began writing equations he did not understand, but that solved problems no one had ever asked. He stopped eating. His skin grew pale. He shaved his head, whispering something about echoes. Then he disappeared. Weeks later, 3 others followed his trail. A woman named Alira, a linguist versed in dead Semitic dialects. A man named Vel, who had once built acoustic chambers for testing human pain thresholds. And a third, a former priest called Sinem, who had been excommunicated for teaching a doctrine of silence and blood. They were led not by maps, but by the harmonics left in Korn's notes. Coordinates encoded in resonance, measurements carved in echo. It was Bell who discovered that a particular sequence of rose-shaped number spirals could act as a key. The journey was a trial in itself. Heat that never cooled, insects that followed in silence, and a stench of copper and roses that hung in the air without origins. When they reached the ruins of the temple of Enki, the structure had collapsed into itself, but a path led downwards, a shaft of stone slick with condensation, whispering syllables that should not echo. The lower chamber was not built, but grown. Organic architectures of impossible angles, stones that breathed in rhythm with their steps, stones that breathed in rhythm with their steps. The deeper they descended, the more their memories frayed. Alira began forgetting the faces of her family. Bell heard the sound of his mother's scream looped in the walls. Sinem wept blood. Then the dreams began. None could sleep without encountering the 3 figures. They were faceless, shifting shapes wrapped in barbed light, crawling beneath the fabric of thought. Each figure promised them immortality, but only through surrender. The rose appeared again, its petals endless, its scent alluring and putrid, its center pulsing like a heart. Wrapped in the rose was the secret. The thorn drew blood, and in that blood visions emerged. each with instructions to perform a rite, not a prayer, but an act, a giving over of something sacred. For Elvira, it was her voice. For Bell, it was the nerves of his left hand. And for Sanem, it was his manhood. Not sacrifice for atonement, but for transformation. As they mutilated themselves, the stone around them responded. Runnels filled with blood. Walls began to move. But the ritual could not be completed alone. The rose demanded a pollinator, an intermediary. This was the being the ancients called the bridge. A figure neither flesh nor shadow, who whispered from the threshold and drank sanity like water. It required a host. Lyra was the first to submit, her voice already gone. She opened her mouth and never closed it again. The being entered her and used her as a mouthpiece. She walked on limbs that bent in wrong directions. Her eyes became black. Now, with the intermediary, the gate opened. What lay beyond was not a vault of gold, nor a chamber of scrolls, but a space of inverted perception. The world twisted around a central wound, a spiral of impossible colors and density, a singularity of thought that defied containment. The voice of the intermediary said, "This is the truth that unmakes." Only by stepping into it could they become more than flesh. Sanem stepped forward first. He collapsed before he reached the edge, his form unraveling into a slick of language. Bell followed, screaming in numbers. Elvira, or what she had become, turned and looked back, and Corin was there. Not as a man, but as a thing of skin in script, robed in equation and blood. He had passed beyond and returned, but only partly. His voice spoke with the pitch of static and wind. There is no ascension, only repurposing. The ritual was not to become gods, but vessels. The three ancient beings sought form. They used the rose as bait, the thorn as test, the temple as forge. What came through the gate was not souls, but remade tools, flesh-shaped into symbols, identity carved into function. Corin was the first, Elia the second, Bell and Sanem the next. But the gate remains open. And somewhere beneath the ruins of the Temple of Enki, the spiral still pulses, waiting. The spiral in the temple's heart pulsed like a second sun buried deep within the earth. It had no light, no heart, yet it illuminated everything with a vision of unbearable clarity. The intermediary, no longer bound to Elvira's shredded voice, took on a voice of its own, not heard through ears, but through bone and memory. It whispered things that made time bleed, sentences that reversed the direction of thought. It told those who remained that the process was incomplete. complete. To complete it, more were needed. Back on the surface, the desert wind howled through cracked stone and dried bones. The ruins of the Inky temple were now cloaked in unnatural stillness. Animals would not approach. Clouds refused to pass overhead. Time slowed in proximity to the entrance. A child who wandered too close grew old in moments and turned to dust. These events were not noticed by governments or satellites. The anomaly hid itself in frequency and angle, folding its signal into ambient noise. But the right minds, those tuned to it by obsession and desperation, heard it. They came. A mathematician from Prague, who had deciphered the ratio of silence intervals in radio static. A woman who woke each morning with star maps tattooed in blood upon her skin. A failed composer who wrote music that reversed when played forward. They came not in search of immortality, but answers. Answers to questions no sane person would ask. They descended the spiral stairs carved in dream, led by the last sound of a dead star. They did not scream when they vanished. They laughed, and the spiral grew. Now the story spread. Travelers began reporting an oasis that did not exist, where the water ran upward, and the reflections showed only the sky. A mining company drilled near the site and found a core sample that whispered when touched. The workers fled after seeing a figure walking backwards through rock. No one spoke of it, but those who knew how to listen began to gather the clues. A man who painted roses with no petals. A child who counted backwards in dreams. An old woman who could hear blood singing from the soil. They all knew. The rose was blooming again. Far from the site, in a forgotten archive beneath the cathedral, built atop older stones, a scholar named Emmett found a scroll written in star-shaped glyphs. Each line ended with a spiral. He traced the patterns in candlelight and saw through time. He saw the hidden temple before it was buried, saw the rose open into endless thorns, saw the bodies melt into meaning. Emmett did not sleep again. He boarded a ship to the desert. By then the spiral had reached the surface, no longer just a vision or a wound. It was a structure. Petals of stone opening in the air, geometries built of sound and blood. A cathedral, not of worship, but of convergence. A place where thought became flesh. Emmett arrived in time to see the newest bloom unfold. A spire of bone and sigil that sang a single note in the wind. The frequency of irreversible invitation. He descended. Inside the walls were no longer stone. They breathed. They watched. They learned. Emmett walked through the corridor shaped like the inside of a rosebud, each petal a memory, not his own. He heard voices, each belonging to one of those who had passed before: Corin, Illyra, Sinem, Vel, all merged into a chorus of warning and seduction. The intermediary met him at the threshold of the vault. But Emmett was different. He had not come to join, he had come to seal. He carried with him a relic recovered from beneath the stones of Mount Nimrat, a sphere carved with words so old they predated writing. This object, when held in silence, inverted intention. He had it now, whispering a single word he had never learned, and the spiral recoiled. The vault shuddered. The intermediary screamed without sound. Then the rose bled. It was not a metaphor. A gush of thick chrism burst from the heart of the spiral, soaking the chamber, burning the air. Petals wilted, symbols broke. The vault began to collapse inward. The intermediary fell to its knees, shedding form after form in a desperate plea. Emmett advanced. He cast the sphere into the spiral. For a moment, all was light, not brightness, but awareness. Every voice, every form, every fell descent, all of them were there, caught in a loop of becoming and devouring, and then it snapped shut. Emmett awoke above ground, alone. The temple was gone, no ruined, erased. The sand was smooth, the stars above were silent. But something was wrong. His shadow was not his own. It moved before him, not behind. When he spoke, his voice echoed with another syllable, layered like the petals of the rose. He was not alone in his mind. The intermediary had not died. It had followed. It was small now, hiding in the spiral of his thoughts, whispering promises. The truth had not been sealed. It had been planted. And far across the sea, in an abandoned cathedral where candles no longer burn and echoes never fade, the stone weeps red again. The spiral begins to turn. The rose begins to bloom. The winds that swept over the erased temple left no trace of what had been beneath. No mound, no stone, no fracture in the sand. But the wind itself had changed. It now whistled with tones too precise for nature, like flutes carved from bone, playing forgotten scales, far from the desert where oceans met broken coasts. These winds began to surface in strange ways. Fishermen heard voices in the crashing surf. Beacons blinked in patterns that watched a no-known signal. Coral began to grow in spiral formation that matched the sequence etched in the vault walls of the hidden temple. The world did not notice. But those who watched the sky began to fear. Astronomers spoke quietly about how several fixed stars had shifted, not moved. Not in the sense of celestial drift, but had flickered. Not in the color of magnitude, but in logic. One star, cataloged by Babylonian scribes as the Eye of the East and later renamed with Latin tongues, now spun at the center of a diagram composed of primes that had no origins. A pattern was spreading. It matched the shape of the spirals beneath Enki's temple. The rose bloomed again, now not in stone, but in space. Emmett, now back in his homeland, wandered the cities, with his shadow in front of him. He rarely slept. When he did, he was back beneath the temple, walking the spiral again, always just behind Illyria, always just ahead of the intermediary. He began to write, not letters, not thoughts, but symbols, in the margins of books left open in public libraries. He carved spirals into park benches. He whispered truths to strangers who forgot them moments later, but dreamed of thorns and stars. The intermediary was still inside him, but smaller now, weaker. Yet it grew stronger every time someone read the words, saw the rose, or heard the hum of the spiral in wind or wire. It fed not on blood, but attention. The world had become its spiral now. Cities became petals, highways the veins. Every screen, every mirror, a way to bloom. And the vault, though buried, was not lost. It was only watching. Somewhere in the Carpathians, beneath a monastery built over the bones of forgotten rituals, a man unearthed a stone identical to the vault wall. In Shanghai, a child scribbled the same star map that led Corin to the temple in a trance. In Chile, a photographer captured a landscape where the clouds formed a perfect spiral around an unseen center. These events happened in silence. They connected not through language or signal, but through form. The rose, the thorn, the spiral, these were the grammar of the gods before memory. And the intermediary was no longer alone. It was not one voice now, it had many. In Emmett's final waking hours, he locked himself in a stone room lined with mirrors. He spoke to the reflections that did not mimic him. He asked questions no philosopher had dared ask since the fire burnt beneath Babel's bones. He was not answered. He was shown. He saw the truth, that the world had always been a vault, the sky its lid, the stars its glyph. The rose was not blooming. It had never stopped. The temples beneath the temple was not a place, but a process. Those who sought it were already changed. Emmett's breath became rhythmic with the spiral. The mirrors cracked. He smiled, bleeding from the eyes, and said the word that made the stars blink. Elsewhere, the wind shifted again. It carried a song this time, a song sung in a tongue older than time, each syllable shaped like a petal, each note ending in thorn. Those who heard it found themselves dreaming of blood blooming like flowers. An archaeologist in Alexandria found a buried tomb filled with carvings of roses with mouths. A subway artist in New York painted a mural of a spiral with teeth. And in Tokyo, the light of a skyscraper blinked out in perfect symmetry, drawing the outline of the entity that once whispered through a lyra. The three that were not named, those whose forms inspired Labasu, Miko, Res Lamuti, and Lelitu, had crossed, not in form, in meaning. They no longer needed temples, rituals, or intermediaries. They were now part of the pattern, every equation that spiraled toward infinity, every glyph carved in dream, every mirror that reflected not the face but the soul. These were their vessels. The vault beneath the temple was not a prison. It was a chrysalis. A rose was not beauty. It was hungry. The spiral did not eat. It curved inward forever. And you, dear listener, have now heard the song too. Perhaps you will forget this story. Perhaps you will laugh and toss another log on the fire. But later, when the wind hums strangely through the trees, or when you dream of stars flickering in unnatural rhythm, you will remember. You will recall the rose, the thorn, the vault that unmakes, the intermediary with too many faces, the child who drew blood maps in her sleep, the man whose shadow led the way. And you will know, even if you say nothing, even if you never speak of this again, that the spiral has already begun to turn inside you, because it was never out there. It was always here, where the rose grows unseen, where the temple waits beneath what you thought was real, where the story ends, not with silence, but with bloom.
As sun sets on summer and dusk brings fall, the days grow short and the nights grow long. As dawn brings winter, the skies become gray, and the wind grows cold. By the fireside is where the stories are told.